Thank you. Good evening and welcome, everyone. First of all, the usual housekeeping arrangements. The action in the event of emergency. There are no practice alarms planned for this evening, but if the alarm sounds, evacuate by going down the main staircase, the back staircase to the High Street car park behind the Town Hall in St Rowell Street. This meeting is being broadcast live over the internet on the Council's YouTube channel and will be available to listen to afterwards. The mobile phones and devices, including cameras by visitors, is welcome, but you are requested to use them discreetly, to set them to silent, and not to use voice or camera flash functions. Speakers are reminded that microphones are to be used at all times. I will not ask the other councillors to introduce themselves. Introduce myself. I'm Councillor Paul Smith, and I'm the chair of the panel.
Chair, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody, and good evening to the viewers at home. Councillor Dave Harris, Chair.
Councillor McLean, New Town and Christchurch Ward, substituting for Chris Pearson, Beerchurch.
McCarthy, representing Shrub End.
Good evening, Councillor Reeson, representing Victory.
Councillor Barbara Wood, representing Victory Ward.
Dennis Willett, representing Lexton and Braeswick Ward.
Richard Clifford, Democratic Services Manager.
Thank you very much. And we're also being joined remotely by some others who will introduce themselves as and when is appropriate. Substitutions, we've already had one mention. There are no more, are there? No. Thank you.
No other chairman.
Thank you. Urgent items?
Got a non-chairman.
Thank you. Declarations of interests?
There's no indication, Chairman.
If any become apparent, just raise in the normal course of the meeting. The next item is the minutes of the previous meeting. I will ask you to approve the minutes of the previous meeting. Everyone is in agreement? Thank you very much. That is agreed. Item 6 is have your say.
Have nobody under have to say, Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll move straight on to item 7, the Local Government Association Model Councillor Code of Conduct. And that is to be introduced by Mr. Andrew Weavers, I believe.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Good evening and good evening, committee members. This report. Sorry, I'm getting quite a bit of feedback at the moment. I don't know if you can hear me okay. Okay. So thank you. So councillor conduct and standards form part of this committee's terms of reference. And that includes reviewing our councillor code of conduct and making recommendations to full council. The committee will recall that our code is kept under annual review by the committee, and our current code has generally served us well. However, the National Committee on Standards in Public Life had made a recommendation to the Local Government Association that local authorities should adopt a model code of conduct to ensure consistency, etc., across the country and also across all tiers of local government. And this would be of particular assistance to councillors who are twin-hatted and were subject to different code requirements depending on what meeting they were in. Now, as mentioned in the report, the Local Government Association produced a draft model code of conduct. The initial drafts did cause concerns to monitoring officers in Essex and elsewhere. And following further consultation by the Local Government Association, the code was subsequently amended, and we are now able to recommend that we consider adopting it. The report before you sets out the details regarding the code, and I won't go through those except just to highlight the following. It is written in the first person to make it more personal to councillors. The position regarding social media is made clear. It includes commentary on each of the obligations. Our current code does not have any commentary in it at all. It includes a clear definition of bullying, which is the ACAS definition, which was also a recommendation of the Committee on Standards in Public Life. The Local Government Association has provided accompanying guidance on the code, which can be found at Appendix 3 of the report, and also a training pack for monitoring officers to use, which again will ensure consistency across the country. Now, authorities in Essex are gradually adopting the code. For example, Southend adopted it in May, Essex County Council adopted it from the 1st of June, Malden adopted it in July, Basildon adopted it last week, and Chelmsford and Rochford are going to be adopting it from the 1st of August. Now, with the introduction of a new code, training is going to be key. And so prior to the introduction of the new code, the report recommends that this is delivered to all councillors in advance of the implementation of the new code. And that would be done by myself by utilising the Local Government Association's training pack, which I just mentioned. Now, the report also recommends that all town and parish councils in the borough be encouraged to adopt the model code. I am actually aware of one parish council which has already adopted the code. So finally, Chairman, the report suggests that the committee recommends to full council that we adopt the code from 1st of December 2022 or such other date as the committee may determine. This date was suggested to give us enough time to deliver the training if full council agreed to adopt the code at its meeting on the 19th of October 2022. Happy to take any questions, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for that report, Mr. Williams. Mr. Chairman, I'm very pleased to be able to read this report and comment on it. For me, in life is normal. I wouldn't expect anybody to treat me impolitely or them the other way around. It lowers, as I say, the public expectations of what we are as councillors. So for me, I'm fully supporting, and I've seen written word less than respectful in newsletters and social media, the verbal word less than polite, shouting, etc., etc. So I think it's right and proper that we should support this. I note the changes really to the model is a lot to do with registration of interest, etc., etc. I think that's good and proper. That I think the council is happy with those changes within there. Get this training underway. I'm hoping there's going to be all councillors will be asked to. I know can't force anyone, but take part in that training. I would hope we all get something out of it, so that we can treat each other with good respect, do honesty, and make sure that we uphold the highest possible expectation of the Nolan principles. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smithson.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Withers, could I ask you two very quick questions, please? The first is, you said that one parish council has already adopted this. Could you tell me which one, please? And then the second question is, what plans are there to transpose these into the codes of conduct for the commercial organisations or into their own policies and practices where appropriate? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. So, Mr. Chairman, I would answer that. The parish council that has adopted the model code, the one that I'm aware of, is Marks Tay, and that did that, excuse me, quite recently. In regard to the council's companies, the code itself won't be embodied by those companies, but the councillors who are nominated to the boards of those companies will be subject to the code of conduct, this new code of conduct, because you'll be acting in your capacity as a councillor. That's the reason you are there as a company director, because you are a councillor. Therefore, you'll be acting in your official capacity and you will be subject to the code of conduct. I hope that answers the question, Chairman.
Yes, thank you very much. Councillor Willits.
Thank you, thank you, Chairman. Can I raise an issue which has been raised on many occasions in the past, but I make no apology for raising it in the context of the new code, and that is the question of councillors bringing the authority into disrepute because of their behaviour on social media or email or a whole host of ways, Chairman. And previously, we've been in the position where councillors can have two personas, council persona, in which case they have to follow the code and presumably follow the new code. And there's been a get out where if they use their private persona, although they are well known to be a councillor, they do not have to observe the code. So if I, as Councillor Dennis Willits, make an insulting remark to another councillor or member of the public, I'm likely to appear on disciplinary before you. If, on the other hand, it's dynamic Dennis Green who makes exactly the same insulting remark, it is not within your purview, Chairman, to call me before the committee and bring me to account for my bad behaviour. Not that I would ever do so. So can I ask, Chairman, is there any progress in the new code to encompass all activities of people who are known to be councillors, and therefore their conduct, if unbecoming, brings the council into disrepute, even when they are not claiming to act in their official capacity, for instance, by using their councillor.name.name or some other identity which clearly identifies them as a councillor, but where it's known that they are a councillor and what they're saying can be treated as coming from a councillor, although they're using their private persona.
Mr. Chairman, if I may answer that, I think Councillor Willett's question is a very, very pertinent question, and he's quite right. It's something that has caused issues in the past. I think we need to remember the code of conduct only applies, and this new code of conduct only applies when you are acting in your capacity as a councillor. And that's common with our existing code of conduct. However, what this new code of conduct does also say, it says that the code of conduct applies when you are acting in your capacity as a councillor, which may include when your actions would give the impression to a reasonable member of the public with knowledge of all the facts that you are acting as a councillor. So it could well be that in certain circumstances where a councillor potentially says something in their allegedly private account, they are actually caught by this provision in the new code that, to all intents and purposes, a reasonable member of the public thinks they are acting as a councillor, and it would be treated as being within the remit of the code accordingly. It's something we would have to look at in more detail, and it's something that we'd have to look at in association with the accompanying guidance. But I hope perhaps that may give Councillor Willett some reassurance that I think that it does. This code does give a bit more strength to those sorts of situations. Thank you, Chairman.
Chairman.
Chairman, that is reassuring to hear that the code is moving in the right direction, and it's also good to hear that Mr. Weaver thinks that there is a greater degree of flexibility which can be used to ensure that the councillors, regardless of their persona that they're using, must not bring the council into disrepute. That there are possibilities being suggested by Mr. Weaver to toughen up this area. Would it be appropriate if we ask him to report back, Chairman, as the work on this particular item proceeds, in regard to the strengthening of the rules to cover private personas which are clearly identifiable as a member of the council?
Thank you. As I understand it, this is a code that has already been worked on by the local government associations. It's not up to us to actually toughen it up, but I fully understand what you mean for interpretation of it. and certainly I think it's something that would be very important in the training to make it very clear as to what's going on. And I'm certainly going to have to check that Dynamic Dennis has not been deleted from my list of email followers if I'm not careful. Mr. Reeves, is that an accurate situation? Would you pick up the making sure it's covered in the training?
Yes, Chairman. Thank you. Will
Yes,
do.
Chairman.
Councillor Woods.
Yeah, I have a question for Andrew Weavers, please. Thank you, Chair. On 3.2, Andrew, agenda, it says central government has not yet responded to the recommendations, and we do not know when it will react, although a response is to be expected soon. Have you had a response back to central government?
Chairman, the answer to that is no, not at the moment. So I don't quite know how long soon is,
Thank you very much. I would assume that when it comes to this matter here, there won't be any need to declare interest for people who are parish councillors such like, though there would be an impact. Thank you. I wouldn't want to get off on the wrong foot with this code. So are we all done with that? And can we proceed to the recommendations which are set out in 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3? Are we happy with them all?
So move, Chair.
Thank you very much. That's agreed unanimously. We'll now.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman.
On the agenda. Thank you very much. The presentation. Next up is Paul. And
thank you. Thank you, Chair. I hope you can hear me okay. This is the financial monitoring report for year end 21-22. That was quite a difficult year in terms of budget monitoring, because obviously the budget for 21-2 was set in the middle of a national lockdown in December 20. So the income budgets in particular were quite prudent, and very fortunately things got back to normal more quickly than expected. So we greatly exceeded income budgets, plus we had additional support from the Department of Levelling Up for income loss grant. So we originally expected in setting the budget that we would need to use about 2.4 million of the council's reserves to balance out, but we did not in fact need to do so. So actually very close to budget in this year, which is a great effort by all the service managers. If I could also comment briefly that in terms of 2-3, the current year, we will be coming to the September meeting with the monitoring report for the first quarter. So I think that will enable the committee to see what lessons have been learned from 1-2, how we're actually progressing in a more normal year in 2-3. And also that because we are using or used less reserves in 1-2, we're able to carry the use of reserves forward into our 3-4 budget proposals, where in the report's July cabinet, we assume 1.7 million use of reserves, and also that we can release some reserves in 2-3 to deal with issues such as the cost of living crisis. So I think it is a much better position than we originally budgeted. These are our own figures. The audit for 21-2 is some way from conclusion, but I'm not aware from BDO of any major issues identified in the account. So I think this is a pretty reliable guide to how we have performed. There's a usual appendices, Chair, in the report setting out quite a bit of detail how the outturn arose. So would welcome any comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll open up for any questions any members may have. Councillor Wood.
Right, thank you. I want to go to the page 42, the figures shown there. I do understand rounding up and rounding down, but if you actually look at the budget figures, the figure 54041, if you look at your figures, come to 42, and if you go down to the next subtotal, if you add the figures shown, it comes to 29,693, and then it ends up, if you add it up correctly, it comes to 34,349. I've got those figures, so it actually ends up £2,000. And the premises related figures, if you go across those figures up to 568. I mean, I do appreciate you round up and down figures, but they don't add up. Sorry.
Sorry, Councillor Wood. On my internet access, I don't actually have the committee page numbers. Were you referring to a particular table? Sorry.
Appendix P of the end of year subjective analysis.
Right. Okay. So we'll have a look at that. And could I perhaps go back to you directly, Councillor Wood, on that one?
Thank you very much. I mean, I suspect once we have full figures, because they are rounded figures there, may well solve the issue. But I appreciate your thoroughness at checking the figures. Are there any other comments on there? Otherwise, I will just... sorry, yes, Councillor Wood.
Sorry, I've got another one. On page 43, there's an income shortfall of 87k, AMO licenses, civil penalties and redress scheme. I mean, that seems a lot of money. And break that down slightly.
Sorry, Councillor Wood, which page are you looking at? I do apologise. Is this an Appendix C, Councillor Wood?
Paul, it's Councillor McCarthy here. It's Appendix C, outturn variances.
And which service was it? Sorry.
Private sector housing.
All right, thank you.
In overall income, 87k.
Would it be possible, Chair, to provide a detailed breakdown of that and circulate it with the minutes?
I think that would be best.
Yes,
thank
you. Fine, thank you.
Councillor Smithson.
Thank you, Chair. I suspect we may end up doing the same thing again and circulate the minutes. On the customer service area, contact and support centre, we have a 72% overspend on messenger and post route, which seems exceptionally high to me. Then on the corporate improvement, corporate and democratic core, we have 29% overspend on banking transaction charges, which I'd like to understand. I'm not sure whether Councillor Wood is going to point out the neighbourhood services thing, or want me to do it? Okay. On the neighbourhood services line, about 3 lines from the bottom, it talks about the Colchester woodland planting year 3 of 5, which is a £55 figure. I suspect that there's 1,000 indicated from the 55. Your budget's out by 40,000 or so. I'm happy to take those minutes as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it would point out to be 54,500 exactly. Thank you very much. Again, I think it's important that items are carefully looked at and variances are considered as to what we've done. overall, I think the figures that we're showing are very good compared to what we were projecting, that we were looking at a £2 million deficit, and it came in at roughly £73,000. And some of that was accounted for by changes in reserves and in the minimum revenue requirements. So it was an extremely good financial performance, and one which a lot of other councils would have been very pleased to have. And so if there are no further questions on that, I'll move on to the recommendations for those. Report? We are? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
We now come on.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We now come on to item 9, the year-end review of risk management.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chairman.
That's me again.
Mr. Reed.
That's me again.
Thank you. So this report gives the committee a year-end review of risk management for 21-22. Just to give the committee a recap, you receive 2 reports a year on risk management, the year-end report and an interim report at 6 months. The primary responsibility of the committee is to endorse the council's approach to managing risk and to oversee the council's strategic risk register. Now, the year-end report asks the committee to approve the risk management strategy and to send it to Cabinet, which in turn would send it on to full council for endorsement as the strategy forms part of the council's policy framework. There have been no changes to the fundamental processes which underpins the strategy. However, the opportunity has been taken to update some of the terminology in the document. The strategic risks are reviewed quarterly by the senior management team, where there is challenge on what the strategic risks to the organisation are at that point in time. The latest review of the risks were undertaken in June, and they are set out in the risk register attached to the report. The current key strategic risks to the organisation are set out at paragraph 1.4 of the report, Chairman, and I'm happy to take any questions on the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Smithson, you've indicated.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Weavers, I have quite a lot of questions. That's probably because this is my first time looking at the strategic risk register, and I should probably declare that I actually work in a risk management role, so I'll probably look at this a little more in depth than some of the other committee members might wish that I did. If I can turn to the actual register itself and look at ST2 spending power, I see that there is mention of inflationary pressures and cost of living and the potential impact that that has on the failure to pay taxes. I'm genuinely a little bit concerned that we don't have anything here regarding public sector wage growth and potential for industrial action in the current climate. So I'd be keen to understand whether the senior management team have given that consideration. And in the same vein, I also don't see anything in the strategic risk register around dependency, which following COVID, I should imagine was quite an issue for us. Do you want to answer them one by one, or do you want me to just plough on?
Chairman, if I could just answer the first one in relation to ST2 and spending power, that is something that will be looked at the next review. So this is looking backwards, in effect, from the review that was undertaken in June. The points that you're validly making now, I think, is something that should be looked at by the senior management team in the review in September, which will soon be here. One thing, could I just say, Councillor Smithson, I'm really sorry, but I didn't catch the second point that you made, your second concern, you mentioned something about COVID.
Yes, sorry, I was talking about key person dependency. I don't see that in the strategic risk register either. And even what we've just been through, I would expect it now. It's certainly in ours.
Can I just say, I understand your point.
Can I just say, I understand your point, yeah.
Moving forward to the risk matrix itself, thank you for presenting it like this. I love seeing matrices like this. Which probably makes me a bit of a pedant, but there you go. Couple of things here. We have a number of risks that move two bands through mitigations, mitigating actions. Whilst I'm not unsurprised by that, what I don't see from risk register is how they've moved two bands. So I think I've got to request the mitigating actions in the risk register are a little more detailed so that I can see how they move two bands. Some of them move on both the probability and the impact scores, and I'd just like to understand how each moves each way. And then coming to the residual risks themselves, we still have 5 risks which sit outside of our stated risk tolerance line, and I don't see what mitigations or what plans there are to move them back within tolerance, or if they can't move within tolerance, we should state that. I think it's important. And then that raised the next question, which was who actually set the tolerances? Is that set by officers? Is that set by cabinet? Is that set by this committee or full council?
Chairman, if I can deal with the last point first, the tolerances are agreed by the senior management team. Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to be able to answer Councillor Smithson's questions tonight because I haven't got the detailed knowledge on this. But if you like, I can get an answer for him and circulate it to the committee.
Thank you. I think that would be useful, and that's a valid point. Bear in mind, with the new members of the committee, it probably would be helpful to have more detail about mitigants that are being applied than would be normally in these reports, because some of the old might well know exactly what has been done and understand why it would reduce it. It's not at all clear to someone new as to exactly what we've done and why that would result in a lower risk rating, either probability or in consequences. Councillor, is that with you?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I too lost. I promise everyone can have a go. Turning to the risk strategy itself, Mr. Weavers, two points. One, I don't see anything in here about black swan events, and given that we've just COVID and we are in the middle of a war in Ukraine, I think we probably do need to have some sort of reference to black swan events or what kind of process will happen in the event that something like that happens again. Even if it is, there's a special management call, something like that. It is unusual to have a risk management strategy that doesn't refer to black swans.
Councillor, is
yes,
I think not everyone is aware.
So sorry, here I go. Latin jargon. So, a black swan event is the kind of thing that happens terribly infrequently, but has the ability to completely bring down the business. So COVID is a black swan type event. A war is a black swan. It doesn't happen very often, but when they do, they have massive impact on our ability to function. And then the last point from me concerns Appendix 1, risk management process. I think the process looks great. The one thing I don't see there is anything regarding risk closure. So we have risk control, we have risk monitoring. We don't say what happens when a risk is finally deemed to be under control and off the risk register, whether it's done forever or it comes back at some point, or there's some sort of post-monitoring review after 6 months or so, and that's just best practice like that. Thank you, Chair. Sorry for taking up so much time.
Thanks very much. And thank you for your very good explanation of a black swan events. I think those points can be noted, Mr. Weaver's.
Yeah, Chairman, yes,
Yes,
I have noted them. And I do thank Councillor Smithson for his explanation of a black swan event. Now I know what he's doing. Now I understand what he's talking about. COVID, of course, was something that did affect the operation of the council. However, we were able to continue by adapting and changing the way that we delivered council services. So it did not bring down the council, like in that sense. We changed, we adapted, and we delivered our services to our residents in a different way. So I think we did mitigate that risk pretty well, if in my view. But I've taken down a note of Councillor Smithson's comments and thank him for them.
Thank you very much. Councillor Willits.
Yes, sometimes Chair, I ask the naive question, how did we get there in the first place? And if we look at one of the highest risks, which is shown on the table, ST3, the risks of key partnerships going off, which result in the council failing to deliver on its key priorities or being unable to afford to deliver those priorities. The process we have seems to be we decide what we're going to do. It's clearly Cabinet, because they take the decision. Cabinet decides what it wants to do in terms of strategic partnerships. Having done so, there are a whole exposures which then become apparent, which sort of cripple the actions or intentions of the Borough Council. So we move from the initial score matrix, which has all these exposures, down to the residual score matrix, which on the occasion just drops down one box and doesn't seem to make all that much difference. We can say it's down from very high risk to very high risk. And the question which dwells in my mind is, how do we get there in the first place? Surely when we're thinking about the type of partnerships we're going to get into, at that stage, we should be looking upon dependencies before we put those dependencies into our strategic plan. We should be cautious in how we put together a strategic approach, which depends so much on key partners that it becomes one of the highest risks of the council. So my question, which is a generalized question, is that whenever we think about doing something new, we should be looking upon looking at the effect that favour of other organisations should have in deciding how we're going to operate, accepting we're going to take a particular course of action, and then realising, golly gosh, Chairman, that there are some real impediments and some real possibilities of our chosen course of action going wrong. So my question is, how comes we get ourselves into the mess of ST3 being entirely dependent upon other key partners, when perhaps if we want to do those activities, we should have thought of doing the things in-house so that Cabinet has complete control over perhaps an enlarged scheme of activities rather than relying upon partnerships. I know partnerships are very important to get into matrix working, but the pitfalls of that are clearly indicated by ST3, and even after we've taken remedial action, the fact that it still remains one of the highest risks to the council, and shouldn't have got there in the first place. And most businesses would have seen it coming and avoided it, rather accept it into our strategic programme, then have a huge risk to manage.
Thank you. I have to say I feel being a little bit harsh there, Councillor Rhodes, because I think any organisation of the size of Colchester Council, with its limited budget, will have to work with other partners. And while we start out, everything's going to be fine. I mean, the example was the First Sight project, which I know, Councillor, you have some very fond memories of. That was something we started out with a group of partners who we thought were reliable, and then circumstances changed, all manner of difficulties occurred. So I think it's a realization that if, as a council, we want to work with neighbouring authorities or with the county council or other areas, we're going to have to accept that there is a risk that their financial circumstances may change and they may be unable to deliver on all the commitments they've given us. Certainly, I know when I worked for a bank, we looked at third-party risk, something which we take as part of being a bank and doing business. So I think perhaps you're being a little harsh to it, criticise a council for getting into that position. Councillor Smithson.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, I completely understand what Councillor Wills is saying. I think where I would be looking is to say, okay, what's happened during that contract signing process? What mitigations are we taking there? Are we in, indemnity, liability guarantee, things like that? So I think that's what I would be looking for in mitigation actions, and maybe it's just language, but it does sort of tend to suggest mitigation language that after the contract is signed, we'll do reviews and stuff rather than front loading some of these protections. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think that could be implied from the word. I certainly know that there are instances, and First Sight as an example, where we did actually have performance guarantees in there, which actually proved to be very effective for the council.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, it's very interesting debate. For me, the document in front of me, it is in two parts. I'm very interested in the strategy, and other members have already talked about strategic impact, etc. And I will comment on that first of all. ST3 that's been mentioned. It very clearly ICB or care system that's now in that we used to have a clinical commissioning group, and I'm acutely aware of cancer as well that's happening, and it's early days. There are always partnerships to be made and brokered, and I think it's early days for the NHS and the elected representatives, etc., and the governance, local governments to actually form partnerships, but it takes a while to do. As they improve, I'm hoping that the director of strategic director of public policy in place will look at that as that develops in a few months' time and review those numbers, because as they see stronger partnerships coming in, that strategy will be helped by that. On the second point, and I welcome Andrew Weaver's comment on that, on thought whether there's that ST3. But my second question is much more important for me as a community representative about the service we provide from frontline services outside this building into the rural areas, into the urban areas. And I think those very high ones are the red caps we've got there, with the spending power, etc., etc. Obviously, they'll need reviewing as we go forward. And for me, not delivering our services is a risk that we don't want and we have to manage. And as long as we keep reviewing this document, and I think one of the strong things, Chair, I'm saying, is doing the. I'm just going back a few months to when we had councillor meetings about the pandemic, frank discussions of what to do. But officers were liaising with each other, department to department, councillors were liaising with each other, councillor to councillor, councillor officer, and we had these round robin meetings, all encompassing. And I think some of the good things that came out of that, Chair, can be in that, and that's very inclusive in working and making sure we take account of our residents at the front line who receive these services to make sure the service provision and service delivery are maintained throughout. And that's the objective of this document as far as I'm concerned. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Weavers, the earlier point that Councillor Harris made.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Risk ST3 really, in my view, is looking at the implications on the authority if partnerships were to fail. So we're looking at the impact. So you can see on the scoring on this, we have reviewed it and actually put it high, raised it up, the scoring higher than what it was in the previous score for the reasons set out in the table. But we understand what those potential impacts are on the council and our residents. So this is reflecting the importance of those strategic partnerships and what the consequences could possibly be if they were to go wrong. But I would just like to reassure the committee that obviously we do put in place as many mitigation measures as we can to try and work with our partners to ensure that that doesn't happen. But if it were to happen, this is the potential consequence. And that's just being sort of realistic about that. But again, as I say, this is kept under constant review by the senior management team and will be looked at again. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Willetts.
Yes, Chairman, I accept what is being said. Once we're in a partnership, we then have to put in the countermeasures to ensure that the impact of any partners going down or becoming remote, being able to do that particular activity, that is dealt with properly and soundly by the risk register as it stands. But I still don't hear an answer to my earlier question. As if we look at the circumstances given in the dialogue on ST3, what due diligence is done on the clinical commissioning group to ensure that we're going to have a longevity which would support our project? And I guess what happened there was, good old clinical commissioning group, they'll be supporting that project. No need to have any formalised agreement with them until we've actually got the partnership signed, and then we find out that they shift off the scene and leave the responsibility to an entirely different organisation with whom we don't have the same contact. Had due diligence been done on the longevity of the clinical commissioning group, and had we got assurances that they would be in place for the length of partnership we were dealing with, when the council was moving into a wide range of wellbeing services for our residents, then perhaps that might not have happened, or it might have been a clinical commissioning group, if we tried to do due diligence on them, would have not given us straightforward answers, so we couldn't have made a decision. So we have to deal with it by the normal management process. But I still feel that there's a gap there in that we're getting some of our strategic activities into the very high category. They need not have got so had we questions and sought the right assurances in the first place to make sure that we would be in a position to deliver. We would have continuing support from these organisations rather than say, well, yes, if they fail during the life of the partnership, we'll deal with that as a strategic risk, whereas we should have been in that position in the first place.
Thank you. I must admit, when changes happen that are not the remit of this council, i.e. the government changes policy or what have you, trying to risk management around government changing its mind, governments of any political description, is probably going to be a rather difficult and thankless task. But I do understand what you're saying, that there are elements where we need to make sure we're dealing with bodies where we need to ensure their contractual ability. Perhaps the examples we're looking at are not ideal ones, but certainly if we were looking at a commercial relationship with a company, we would obviously expect some sort of due diligence into their financial being to ensure that they would be, in the terms of what I used to put on my bank statements, reliable for your figures and purposes or whatever. So I think that point needs to be. Councillor Harris.
Only to say, Chair, that you're absolutely correct. The government, if we had their way, or the Commission group had their way, they'd still be there. But the government no longer shall be so. This is the new arrangement, and you will align with the local government departments, and then you would make the wellbeing boards from them. Now, as I said earlier on, in what I said earlier on, Chair, if I can just remind, for that strategic view, that can be, we don't just sit there idly by in a risk register and watch what happens. We, local government, surely we develop those relationships, ensure that we develop those relationships in the integrated care boards. And as those new partnerships develop, I would expect, and I hope that others would agree with me, that that risk register will diminish as those partnerships grow stronger.
Thank you. We've got a couple of councillors indicating from outside the meeting. Am I allowed to accept their contributions? Sorry.
You are, Chair. Yes.
Okay. Councillor Corrie and Councillor King, I believe there. Councillor King, please.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair.
I hope you can hear me, because I'm hearing 2 words out of 3 from your side. They're very good, 2 out of 3 words, but that's what I'm hearing. But I just want to sort of say it's a very good conversation from my perspective, and subject to what my good colleague Councillor Corey might want to add with his extra insight into Health Alliance and other matters. For me, I read this like Mr. Weaver's, that this is entirely appropriate to flag and monitor, manage and score in the way that we have. What I find helpful is the conversation we've had, and my undertaking to the committee is that this is worth a conversation. But it's really, as a number of your colleagues have said, and it's my sense of this as well, that change is rightly flagged, but the quality of the relationships, which actually will always matter, I think, more than the quality of the project control, although that really matters as well, is such that we can have confidence with that future. But it is an evolution, it is a transition, and I think it's appropriately scored. But I really value the conversation around this, and my undertaking, as I say, is to go and have I will take advice on this, but I think this is in the right place, reasonably described and heading in the right direction. And that, for me, a conversation I've often had with Councillor Willis, that's the value of a good risk register. You know, it's the obvious, isn't it? It's intended to capture possibility and ensure that we pay attention to it, which you are tonight. But I just want to try and give you some personal assurance that I read this as, I think, the balance of opinion on the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Corrie.
Thank you, Chair. I do agree with most of what Councillor King has just said there, and I'll declare an interest as only recently stopping being a non-exec director on the CCG and possibly having a role in the future alliance model that exists. So I can give a tiny bit of context, but also I can first of all say that I do actually understand the principle of what Councillor Willits is saying, and perhaps it is another level that we need for this particular item, a risk register for us as a council, just to give an extra layer of reassurance. These are public bodies that we're working with. These are partnerships that are most likely never to fail and never to renege on their commitments. However, we need to always be doubly assured, and that's the whole point of this meeting, the whole point of the risk register. So I think there probably is an extra layer to put in there. I would double down on what Councillor King has said about the relationships that have been built over time. These are partnerships that actually reduce our risk in terms of budgetary commitments, in terms of the wider determinants of health that affect our residents. So actually the strong partnerships we've built And these projects we are working on are wholly positive and will only reduce the risk upon our residents. However, the principle that Councillor Willett suggests we should sort of look into a bit deeper, I really do agree with. So I think that should be done. In terms of the context of the health changes, that has been through government policy, and actually my role had to come to an end, as did the chief executive of our council, Pam Donnelly's role, because local government is not as intrinsically put into the new ICB, the Integrated Care Board or the Integrated Care System, in the way that it was previously with the CCG relationship. But what we have done is we have built a really strong alliance partnership that now sits under the ICB, the Integrated Care Board, and under that larger health system, and actually again makes a foundation of stronger connections with our health partners that will continue on in the future. So on the relationship and the strength of those partnerships, I can reassure you. But actually, I do take the point from Councillor Willits and think we probably should add in an extra layer of risk understanding that says, yes, we do understand that these relationships could fail, or they could change, or government legislation again makes a different change into how our relationship works. But otherwise, I would say it is a positive step for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to raise the item CO3 financial inequality that we're showing down there. I'm a little surprised that we haven't actually increased the risk one, given the situation that we're seeing, particularly on the probability, to have it as less than a 50% chance that financial inequality is going to increase is looking very optimistic, in my opinion, at the moment. We're seeing of the cost of living crisis. I appreciate it's a timing issue, but it's perhaps something which Cabinet would like to take note on. And given that we have a couple of Cabinet members listening in at the moment, I thought I'd take the chance to raise it there. And I can see some councillors nodding in agreement there. So I think that would be something that we want to keep an eye on, that's something there. I know we're doing an awful lot to reduce the impact of it, but the probability of it happening, I think, is increasing at the moment. And I think a view of this report probably would need to reflect that. Thank you. If there are no more comments on this one, I will ask you to consider and agree the proposals that are set out in section 2. Are we all happy with that?
So moved.
Thank you very much. Now brings us on to what I believe is the final item this evening, our work.
Chair, this is your work programme item, which comes to the committee every time. The only substantive change to the work programme that's been made is in relation to the annual audit letter and opinion report, which has been put back to a later meeting, Chair, which I was agreed with yourself and the group spokes in advance of the meeting. Otherwise, as before, it's as chairman, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just very conscious that November's agenda looks absolutely packed. Is there any possibility that we can have the paperwork than we might normally have it? It's almost meetings are ready. Can they be circulated so that we can start to formulate questions and opinions? Quite a lot to get through. Thank you.
I certainly think that the November meeting is looking very packed, and we have, I think, mentioned already the possibility that we might need to put an additional date in the diary for the meetings, because certainly, from my point of view, I'd rather have 2 meetings of a shorter duration than 1 meeting, particularly when the quality of work, I have to say, probably does deteriorate after a couple of hours.
Yeah, we could take that and look at that. I understand we were thinking of an additional meeting in the late autumn, perhaps to consider the businesses when the committee acts as the shareholder committee. But we could again perhaps review work in the light of an additional meeting, see how we can divide that up a bit better.
it would also be helpful if we finally had some news from the auditors to have some accounts. But I understand there are, is it 120 councils that are still awaiting their accounts at the moment? So we are not alone in this situation, but it is a worrying item that an awful lot of public money is not being properly looked at, although possibly with some of the fines the auditors have had recently for not doing their job properly. So, we've noted the item. Councillor Willis.
Can I just focus our mind on whether sort of 7 days really is sufficient for members to read and fully digest and be in a position to discuss many of these issues? It may be that some of us live a too full life and have too many hobbies, which distract us from knuckling down and reading the 250 pages of fine print, which turn up with 7 days notice. It may well just be impossible given the way the council works, but Councillor Smithson's suggestion that perhaps we should have a little more time, perhaps 2 weeks, to digest material rather than one, would be most welcome, but if it is at all possible.
Thank you, Dynamic Dennis, as I think there is some merit in what you're proposing, though it perhaps could be that we would get draft versions of some of the reports rather than final ones, so we could at least bring the back. I appreciate not all items we have to publish on the 7 days for matters going out to the public, but perhaps we could look at whether some of the items we could produce at least in draft a bit earlier.
Chair, we can look at what we can do in respect of that in terms of, you know, perhaps getting some of the policies out to you slightly earlier. Yeah.
That would be really helpful. Thank you very much. Right, if there's no further business, I will draw this meeting to close and thank you all for your attendance.